For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dhlamini. Political analyst Ebrahim Fakir discusses the State of the Nation address. The State of the Nation address used to be a very important occasion for South Africans. Do you think that it has lost some of its status in recent years?
No, I don't think so. I think it remains important. I think it remains fundamental. And the antics we've seen in Parliament has attracted even more attention. So I think there's a difference between the kind of attention it attracts because of its spectacular value and because of the spectacle that's created. But I think it still remains vital, it remains fundamental because it charts out the way forward for the year in terms of the way in which government's going to perform and what its programs are going to be. And because we budget on 3-year cycles, the medium-term expenditure framework sets out policy direction. Remember, the State of the Nation will give concrete expression to what should happen for that year, but it will also lay out broad parameters for what will happen in the foreseeable future, at least 5 or 6 years.
Do you think the EFF should be blamed for the chaos we witnessed during the State of the Nation address?
Well, you know, that's a very difficult one to answer because it's hard to apportion blame. I think everyone in Parliament has some agency, and because they all have some agency, they should all take some responsibility. Now, on the one hand, you have a president who did not uphold, as the Constitutional Court found, his oath of office. And I think that there is a legitimate gripe made by all opposition parties, not just the EFF, including the DA, including COPE, including the IFP, all of the opposition parties who complain and moan about the fact that we have a president who is addressing us, opening Parliament, which has been found not to uphold his oath of office. Now, I think that there is a constitutional point which the EFF tried to make, but which does actually not hold any water. So the fact that the Constitutional Court said that the president did not uphold his office doesn't translate into the fact that it delegitimizes the president from actually holding that office. What the Constitutional Court is saying is that there's an opportunity, if Parliament wishes to do so, and the Chief Whip of the ANC made this point, to vote him out of office, impeach him, or to use one of the 2 sections of the Constitution in order to either pass a motion of no confidence, and then there's the more extreme one in which the president would have to resign along with his cabinet and they would all lose their benefits. Now, of course, they tried this on more than one occasion and it didn't pass muster. So the constitutional point, I think, gets a bit lost there, that he still remains the president. Now, what I think could have been done is that the EFF could have registered this, as did the DA, and they did register this point, and then make the point and then sit down and let proceedings go on. But I think what happened was that this was caucused, planned, synthesized, and then instrumentalized. And it was done so to push matters to the brink, because when it was pushed to the brink, it forced the hand of the security apparatus, which was in Parliament, and the presiding officers to act in the heavy-handed manner in which they did. But I think that was the plan all along, because it would then serve to legitimize the point that there is massive securitization, that there is a big clampdown, but in fact that is not really true, because we are relatively free to be able to say the kind of things we want to say. So it's very difficult to apportion blame and just say it is the fault of the EFF. Of course, everyone in Parliament must take, because they have agency, also have to take responsibility. But I'm not the only one saying so. I mean, the Constitutional Court, along with finding that the president did not uphold his oath of office, also found that Parliament as a whole, and this implicates all political parties, in this, saying that Parliament did not dispense with its responsibilities of oversight and of holding the president to account. So, of course, the opposition will say, but we tried in committee, in the ad hoc committee on Nkandla and in a whole range of other things. We did try to do this, but because of the ANC's majority, they prevailed. But that's how democracy works. The important point, I think, which was missed in all of this is that, see, if this kind of behavior is sustained, particularly by the EFF, on the disruptive sort of aspects, but also if you use the rules of procedure as the DA have done to try and delay, obfuscate, and push things to a point where you filibuster endlessly, it will begin to detract away from the autonomy and the independence of Parliament as an independent arm which is overseeing the executive and holding them to account. But because government will still have to continue, the point that gets lost is that when Parliament becomes so denuded, the executive's hand becomes strengthened and government still has to continue, and it gives greater license for the executive to act in more arbitrary ways because they will simply push through issues because Parliament becomes so weakened and doesn't in fact play the role that is envisaged for it.
Speaker Mbete denied the DA's request for a moment of silence for the Dhlamini patients who died. Do you think the DA was trying to score political points like President Zuma has said in his response?
It is an emotional issue, and clearly they did try to score political points, but why should we be surprised? This is what political parties do. I think it was a little callous not to have allowed it. It wouldn't have harmed anyone to have allowed it. But understand this from the other side as well. The Speaker, with the chief whips of all the political parties and sometimes the Rules Committee as well, has preliminary meetings before the opening of Parliament at which they schedule and table the order of proceedings. Now, and here's the point, had the DA wanted to really and genuinely register this, they could have sent a motion or notice of motion, or at least informed the Speaker before the sitting that they would have asked for this, because they have the scheduling and logistics and other planning and preparatory meetings for what the order paper would look like. And there's opportunity, as far as I'm aware, in terms of the procedure administratively, for them to have provided notice to the Speaker and the other whips of other parties that they would like to place this motion on the table. Now, they could have done that, so they didn't do that, right? So clearly it is a political stunt, but let's not be surprised. It is what political parties do.
Taking the high level of corruption in our country, do you think President Zuma's speech reflected the seriousness on the matter?
Absolutely not. He hardly even touched on it. And it's a huge problem, and I suspect it was a way in which he wants to take the sting out of the tail in which he himself is not only implicated but embroiled. So even if we believe he's not implicated, he's simply embroiled in all of this and doesn't want any attention and heat on that. But clearly I think the speech and the State of the Nation address didn't really focus much on it. Of course, in his response in the debate to the State of the Nation, because fortuitously there was a coincidence of the breaking of the news in which the bank traders on capital markets colluded to set prices of the rand on the currency market. Of course, they gave him an excuse to then profile corruption, but it's one side of corruption that he speaks of, not a less important one, equally important as corruption in the public sector, but it certainly didn't get the attention that it actually warrants.
President Zuma also spoke about the need for a program of radical economic transformation. Do you think there is some substance to this program?
Look, again, it's as with President Zuma, as is the case with a lot of things, it is the right message often emanating from the wrong person, because there's no one you would find in South Africa today who would say that the urgency of some kind of economic transformation and change is necessary, vital, fundamental. We've got to reduce inequality, have to reduce levels of unemployment and absolute levels of poverty. Issues like the national minimum wage, the national health insurance, which has been mooted, of which a pilot is already in place, those are vital, those are necessary. But we also have to create more opportunities. We have far too many people who are unemployed or don't have gainful, meaningful things to do every day. So clearly, some radical measures are necessary. But again, it's the right message from the wrong person. And why do I say it's the right message from the wrong person? Because no matter how appropriate some of the prescriptions would be, and I would even argue that we need greater prescriptive policy, perhaps even measures like import substitution measures, greater incentives, subsidies, tax breaks and other things to stimulate local investment, to unlock domestic investment in our economy. And we're not even talking about foreign direct investment now, but all of those kinds of investments and all of that kind of exercising of agency is dependent on trust. And if trust levels are so low, then why should we accept that we want to give the state greater power and a government which is running that state greater power to intervene in the economy when all they've proven so far is that much of this actually is rhetorical, it is meant to benefit a bunch of insiders, that the duality of inclusion and exclusion benefits those who are connected to be included and everyone else gets excluded. So that level of trust has broken down so fundamentally. But there's also something else that's important here, is that the question of radical economic transformation, while it might be necessary, has not been spelled out. So what do they mean? Now, of course, they've given some clues. The one clue is that we want to break the back of concentrated monopolies. And that's appropriate because over time you want to break them up, and you can see that this is about an incremental approach. It's not revolutionary. It's not going to break the system. It is simply asking for modest incremental dispersal and distribution, particularly on big government contracts, of which 870 billion will be spent on infrastructure projects at least over the next 2 or 3 years, right? And then prescribing that 30% of big construction contracts should go to small SMMEs. Now, over time, what that will do is build the capacity among SMMEs to become bigger players. It starts to break the concentration of the monopoly amongst the 3 or 4 or 5 big construction companies. On the other side, it will ask for greater compliance with things like the mining charter and other charters which have been put out. Now, those instruments, legislation, state spending, regulatory infrastructure we need to change, more prescriptive policy, those are appropriate, but they depend, as I say, on 2 things. One, on the level of an environment of trust, and secondly, not just trust, but confidence that the state would do what the state says it would do to the benefit of everyone in society, rather than for a closed group of insiders who will continue to benefit, who are connected, who are insiders and continue to benefit from the stream of relationships and networks that they are already embedded in. So that's the fear and that's the suspicion. The third aspect this is dependent on is very high level of state and government capacity. And here, government has proven, unfortunately, repeatedly, whether you take the Dhlamini case, whether you take the ethical case about state capture, and I don't think it's always state capture, I just think it is inappropriate influence. So whether you take that as an ethical example, whether you take the Dhlamini case of a state not dispensing with its oversight obligations to ensure that where the services are provided, people have the capacity to do so, and the resources and the facilities. Or you take the issue of compliance behavior. What has stopped the state from actually ensuring that sanctions are applied to people who don't abide by the regulatory frameworks, by companies who don't abide by the mining charter, as an example? So if you don't have enforcement capacity, and the sanctions which are applied for people who break the law and who work outside the regulatory framework are not trusted to be commensurate with the kind of infraction they've committed, then trust and confidence both break down.
If you were given a chance to brief President Zuma on what would appeal to the nation, what would you tell him?
Well, the first is I would say, look, you've got to emphasize the question of corruption. Second is you've got to make people feel included, because I think the kind of race identity politics which have pushed the ANC to be more responsive to the EFF, to the left, but partly also to the DA, because the DA appears to be encroaching more and more on the kind of central policy pillars of the ANC, that you've got to distinguish the ANC. Third, you've got to re-establish this environment of trust. And fourthly, for your own good, I would advise the president to actually resign, given the kind of scandals which have surrounded him, the fact that we go into an elective conference. But of course, you know, he's so compromised because of the 783 charges which still loom over him, because I think he thinks his legacy is not yet in place. And of course, there's much you can criticize the president about. But I would also say that, Mr. President, that for all the need that we have to reduce inequality, unemployment, re-emphasize the fact that there have been some successes under your watch. One, life expectancy has gone up. The spread of HIV/AIDS, though still problematic and still tragic, the tide of it has been stemmed, even though we still have bad behavior and other forms of prevalence which makes the disease sort of prevalent. But you can claim some kind of modest changes, that you've spread the benefits of a welfare state far and wide. You now want to ensure that the quality of state spending with regard to the return that investment made is actually showing an improvement in the quality of healthcare, the improvement of educational outcomes, the improvement of the quality of the way in which state management in the public services is operating.
That was political analyst Ebrahim Fakir speaking to Crima Media's Polity about the State of the Nation address.